Yeah, welcome to this last workshop session. Okay. Yeah, so I really admire you. I mean, you have a really packed program. If you are intent to take every workshop, then you have a full package program. Yeah. First of all, I have to apologize a little bit because it's the first time I do kind of a workshop in English, and since English is not my first language, so yeah, we try to get along, I hope so, but what comforts me a little bit is that probably for most of you, English isn't also the first language, so I can hope that you have a little bit mercy on me. But I think we can go along very well. Well, we would like to talk about on the ICOR workshop route on an important ICOR value, at least for me an important ICOR value that has to do with leadership and leading people. I myself have been in the 35 years where I'm employed in the church, only 5 years really been in the pastor in a church. All the other years I've been in some kind of a leadership position in the church. For about 16 years, a youth director in the Central Rhenish Conference here in Germany, then about 8 years treasurer of the union, and now for 2 years the president of the union. And at least for the last position, I was one of these guys that has been pushed into the shark tank and not jumped in voluntarily. So I don't know how it's with you. But before we start, I would like to see how many people here are employed by the church and how many people are lay members or volunteers, or however you want to call it. Are there any employees here? Ah, okay, and the rest are, yeah, I don't like the term lay members, I have to admit, because in Germany lay member almost means, well, not professional, just hobby. But when I look into my teams, then some of the lay members in certain areas are more professionals than I ever will be in this area. So I don't really like the term lay member. I rather prefer volunteer or unemployed. But nevertheless, whether we are employed or lay members, we are all in the same situation. We are, when it comes to leadership, in this shark tank and try to survive and try to swim. And it's a difficult topic, leadership. I mean, would you have a definition? If I would ask you so right out of the hand, how would you define leadership, what leadership is? Probably not, probably difficult. Even myself, I would have to look in my notes and give exact definition. And that's the point. It's not easy to define. And I heard an interesting story. Norman Schwarzkopf, it was the famous general in the U.S. Army. He was the general of the first Gulf War in the early 90s. He once had been asked, what does a good leader look alike? Or how does good leadership look alike? And he had an interesting answer. He said, well, I have no idea, but I know when I see it. And I guess that's the feeling we have. An exact definition is difficult, but if you see a good leader, you realize it and you say, well, yeah, that's it. Even when it comes to leadership styles, maybe you have heard of it, certain kind of leadership styles, it's difficult. There are no clear definitions of it. There is such a vast variety of terms and concepts and recipes, even when it comes to leadership styles. Probably the most classic one are from Kurt Lewin. Kurt Lewin was one of the most influential pioneers in psychology. He was one of the 4 great psychologists of the Berlin School. he was famous for his change model he developed for organizational development. Hello, can we help you?
C'est quel thème?
C'est managing people.
Les chats?
C'est vrai, c'est celui-là.
Les chats, d'accord.
Je pense pas qu'il y ait la traduction. Ah oui, d'accord.
Okay, fine. Proceed, welcome. Yeah, he developed in organizational development a three-phase model of change, and he also developed a classification of leadership styles, and this is a very classic one. He differentiates between authoritarian, democratic, and laissez-faire. But if you look on the internet, University of Southern California, they have the servant, the frontline, the transformational, the metamodern, the postmodern, the contrarian, and there are so many others. So there is a vast variety of terms, and I wonder if anyone has an overview of what's all on the screen. So for me, the most influential book I read on leadership was the one of Warren Bennis, where I borrowed the title of the workshop. This book he wrote, Managing People is like herding cats. Does any one of you have a cat as a pet? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Oh, you probably know what Bennis means. I mean, in Germany, we have a saying that says, dogs have masters, cats have servants. And who has a cat knows what it is. And this is exactly what Bennis means. He says, cats probably won't allow themselves to be herded. They may, however, be, coaxed, cajoled, persuaded, adored, and maybe gently led. But you never can herd cats. And then he says that's exactly the same with people. Management often tries to herd them, to get them in a certain direction, but it doesn't work, he says. And if you are interested in leadership, and if you are able to read in English, it's very easily written, but for me it was one of the fascinating book on it, because Bennis had an ethical and value-based approach to leadership, and it's very, very helpful, at least for me. And therefore leadership has in the first place nothing to do with certain techniques or methods or styles. It in the first place has to do with you as a person and who you are. And therefore in this hour we have together, I would like to focus on that, who you are as a person, as a leader, and which factors contribute to who you are and also contribute to your leadership. Because I think it's an important part to be aware of that and then draw the conclusions for your leadership. And if we look at some of the factors that contribute to our personality, there are probably much more. But there are a lot of environmental factors that contribute to what I am. And for our topic, I would like to focus on 3 of them. It's culture, it's theology, and it's personality. And I think they are very important when we think about ourselves as leaders, because they all have an influence of how we lead and who we are. If I would ask you, are you aware of the leadership style you use, your approach to leadership? Could you say that I'm such a leader? Probably not. Therefore, I list it, and you will get all this material, so the PowerPoint and additional material I prepared for you. You will have it on the website, you can download it, so you don't have to take notes. I mean, feel free to do so, but you don't have to. You will find it. There are a lot of possibilities or inventories to determine, if you want to get a first grasp, what type of leader I am naturally, what kind of type of leadership style I normally have. There is a very sophisticated one, it's the leadership style assessment, but it's also a very expensive one, so it's probably not the one you will use. I guess a package for 15 persons is about $300, so it's quite expensive. There are quite a lot of very simple quizzes on the internet. You can just do by yourself for a first quick grasp. The one I did here for a test was this leadership IQ, and it worked quite well. The results fit very well to what I am as a leader. And I prepared in the material 2 inventories. You can also do with your group or with your team. It's the style delineator from Anthony Gregor and a goal people orientated inventory. These are just simple tests, easy to do, but they can help determine where are my preferences as a leader. This work or main questionnaire focuses on the 3 leadership styles of Kurt Lewin, and says, well, normally you have 2 strands of focus in your leadership. The one is, are I more a work or task-oriented person? So are I more interested that the task has to be done, the goal has to be reached, the work has to be accomplished, or am I more people-oriented person? So do I have more interest in that my team feels good, that everyone feels asked, that everyone feels respected, that everyone feels included in the communication? And I always do it with a new team, and the results are very interesting. Back in the time where I was youth director, I had in my Pathfinder leadership team of the conference, and I have to say I'm probably more over here. I'm more a people-oriented type of person, sometimes to that extent that it's I neglect the task and the goals. Important is that everybody feels comfortable and well, and we don't have conflict there. And in this team, I had a person that was over here, a team member. He was so task-oriented. He lost the people out of focus. So he did everything to reach the goal and to accomplish the task. Irritating people, kicking them out of the team, neglecting them. He was so focused on the task. The interesting thing, we both had a very close relationship to each other. And in that case, it worked out fine because we supplemented each other. When I was too focused on that everybody feels fine, he said, well, but we have to reach our timelines, we have to reach the goal we want to have. And if he was too focused on the goal, and I would have to tell him, but there are people that work with us, and we have to look and to see that they can go along with and that they feel well and comfortable. So it's important to know who are the members in my leadership teams and what are their strengths and what are their things they need a little bit improvement. The other one I do and find very helpful is the style delineator from Anthony Gregor. Gregor comes more from teacher education, and he developed a mind style model. He researched on how do people learn, and he found out that's quite different, that people learn differently depending on their personality, on their mindset. And he had two strands. He says people are either have an abstract or a concrete mindset, or a sequential and a random. And then he developed 4 mind styles. And he says, dependent on where your dominant mind style factor is. First, these people learn differently, and you can also apply it to leadership. So that abstract sequential type of leader will be different act than a concrete random type of leader. And as I did it with teams, that's often a really insight for the people. One person told me, well, now I really understand why I don't get along with my co-team member in my Pathfinder group. This guy drives me up the wall. But now I understand, because I'm here, he is there, and as I met them a few months ago, they said, well, we are getting along quite well, because we now know about each other and why we act the way we act, and now we can use it, and we can get along very fine. So these two you find in your material, and if you work with a leadership team, it's just an interesting thing just to do one of these inventories and talk about and get to know each other. Now, the next part where I want to look with you is, we now have been me, my personality, who I am. The next thing I want to look at you, what is very important for me is, how do I look at my fellow human beings? What concept of man and mankind do I have? Because the way I look at my fellow human beings will influence the way I assert my leadership. And I prepared a little test if you want to do. We can do it right now and here. Doesn't take long. Only thing you need is a pencil or a pen. It's also developed by Gregor. It's called the XY theory. The first page is just a little bit introduction if you are the instructor for this test, but we can directly go to page 2. There are 10 simple statements there. And just look at page 2, not at page 3 and page 4. There are 10 simple little statements there, and there is a kind of a continuum. I don't have one. I'm sorry. Maybe I have one here. Well, I have 2. Does anyone else need one? Yeah, maybe you can. And the thing is to do it rather quick, not think too much about it. So you have the statements, and then you have this continuum that ranges from try very hard to do this, or make every effort not to do this. And where on these 4 columns you find yourself, just make an X or a mark. Do it very quickly. Don't think too much about it. It's always with this kind of tests. Now, the 2 I have, I've already. I'll wait. But maybe you can, these markers, they're a little bit oversized. Yeah?
You write a number or just
No, just a mark. Just a mark in it, an X or a circle or whatever you want to do. Yeah, in time of cell phones, I probably should have put it on the internet and make it available online, but I had another one online this morning, but the internet connection is so bad we couldn't do it. So. Are you through with the first page? There is no right or wrong on that, so you can't make a mistake. Well, on the next page, on page 3, you find two theories regarding human beings. Gregor states, he called it the X and the Y theory. In the X theory, with regard to team members, to employees, it is stated that most of humanity has no desire to work and tries to avoid work as much as possible. Because people are generally afraid of work, they must be forced, supervised, threatened with punishment in order to make them produce enough energy to achieve the goal of the organization or the group. Most people want to be led and not take responsibility for what is possible. They have little ambition and seek safety first. This is one view on human beings. And the other theory, the Y theory, he stated, to apply one's physical and mental strengths to work is as natural for a person as to play and rest. Many exercise self-discipline and is committed to achieving the goals to which he is committed. The threat of punishment and surveillance by others are not only ways that exist to achieve the goal of the organization. Most people in the right environment are not only willing to take responsibility, but even aspire to do it. In modern companies and institutions, only a small fraction of the intellectual abilities of employees are used. These are two very contrary views of human beings. And the next thing would be, you have a scale on the bottom of the page. It's also a continuum between, I fully agree with the X theory, and on the other side is, I fully agree with the Y theory. And there is a lot of space in between. So the next idea is that you just, out of your impression, just set a mark where you think between these theories, how do you perceive human beings? On this scale, it's more completely X, completely Y, or somewhere in between. So it's just a short decision. Try to figure out where would I see myself between these two views of human beings. And if you have done this, just go to the last page, because there you can figure out the result of the first questionnaire you did, of these 10 statements, and just make a circle around the numbers of the column on the first page where you make your X, and then count the numbers, add the numbers, sum up the numbers. If you have counted the numbers, just mark them on this scale also, on page 3, where you set your first mark, you just thought how I would think my perception of human beings is. Well, the basic idea behind that is we have a rational view of our fellow human beings, and our leadership style reflects the more unconscious view how I see my human beings. So if it's very close together, the first mark you set and the second mark, then your rational view and your leadership style complies with that. If you are far away, then there is a difference between what you rationally think and what you do out of your guts and what your real unconscious view of human beings is. For us as Christians, it is, I think, important how does the Bible see human beings. And I would like to do a short opinion poll. I mean, there are two basic views in Christianity about human beings. I mean, the one view is human beings are good by nature. And the other one is human beings are evil by nature. I mean, this is a very black and white statements, but if you have to decide between one of these views, where would you decide? Can I see the hands for the people who say, well, in my opinion, human beings are good by nature? 1, 2, 3? Okay, and who would say, according to my understanding of the Bible, human beings are evil by nature? 1, 2, 3, 4, and the rest is undecided and says, well, there is definitely a trick to it, and I better don't make a vote. And I would say it's true. It's true. In the Bible, I see kind of an anthropological tension. I see statements for both. On the one hand, we know this text in Genesis 8:21 where it says, I can quote it in English, so the heart of man is evil from youth on. And in Ephesians 4:17-18, Paul says that the people are alienated from the life that comes from God. So the Bible speaks of broken and fallen human beings that experience alienation. They are not what they are supposed to be. On the other hand, the Bible also speaks that all human beings are created in the image of God. And Paul says in Romans, I mean, you can read the text, that the whole creation longs for salvation and longs for coming back to the situation where they are supposed to be. And therefore I think the Bible has a kind of an anthropological tension. He says, well, deep inside, human beings still have the image of God. They still have a longing for what they have been. So they seem to have a sense of what they originally have been, but they are fallen, alienated. So the Bible says, it's both there. And I find a rather, for me, impressive metaphor for this situation, for the description of a human being. It's from Etty Hillesum. Etty Hillesum was a teacher. She was a Jew in the Netherlands. Unfortunately, she lived during the Nazi times. She was imprisoned in a concentration camp and died there. But she wrote a book that's called An Interrupted Life. And there she gave a statement that was, for me, very impressive, and that describes how I see human nature. She says, there is a really deep well inside me, and in it dwells God. Sometimes I'm here too, but more often stones and grit block the well, and God is buried beneath. Then he must be dug out again. I find it an impressive metaphor, and that's how I try to see human beings, my fellow human beings. I believe that deep inside every human being, there is somehow this image of God, this notion that I'm an image of God. And sometimes I be there, very close to God. But more often stones and grit block this well, and then is God buried beneath and had to be dug out again. And I think it's very important how we do see our fellow human being, because it influences the way we assert leadership. When I remember my first teen camp I had to lead as a freshly youth director, was a 3-week summer teen camp, quite a bit of time. And we went there as a young leadership team, and we had the impression, well, we have everything to do to control the kids, because the only thing they are into is to trick us as leaders and to betray us and to sneak out of order, and therefore we acted accordingly. So during the night we set up watchmen in the alleys there, so they couldn't leave their rooms and they couldn't do their funny things they tried to do. And the complete 3 weeks, they were very exhausting because we were in a permanent war with the kids. And after this experience, I reflected and said, well, what had we done? I mean, basically, these 3 weeks were the holidays of the kids. It was the summer holidays. And actually, my part as a leader is to give them as much of a good time as it's possible, because it's their holidays. I'm here to serve them having a good time, individually and of course as a group. And this experience changed my view and then also changed my kind of leadership. It changes also the view of my board members or the church committee, the church board I mean, or the conference committee. If I go in there and say, well, these are basically all my enemies, they won't harm me, they are against me, and I have to try to control the situation, I have to find that I get my goals through, and I have to act with the resistance I will experience. It will be a completely different thing as if I go into it and say, well, these people are all interested in bringing the church forward. They all have a deep passion for the church, or for the group, or for the youth group. And now let us go and find together and discuss the best ways we can go along. You will have a completely different experience in your work, and it depends on the way you look at people. And therefore it's important, and I think the Bible is very clear and gives us a very clear picture of it. Now we have looked on ourselves, we have looked on how we view our fellow human beings. The third thing I would like to go very fast is a look on culture, because we probably don't realize it so often, but the culture in which we live also influences the way we lead, more than we sometimes try to imagine. There is a very famous saying from Peter Drucker. He was a management consultant and he contributed to the philosophical and practical foundations of modern business and leadership. And he says, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And I think that's true. I don't know, does your church have a kind of a mission statement? Germany we say a Leitbild, kind of a strategy paper, a mission statement that states that's what we want to be as a church, declares our values and how we want to act. Does any one of your churches has developed something like that? Yeah. Well, you say yes.
I don't know it.
You don't. Yeah, you see, that would be my
profile as
yeah.
a church and profile for leadership, and I can't remember both.
Okay.
So I know the church's profile is from the text. Wir haben Gnade und Gnade.
Ja.
Okay.
Okay.
Gnade, Ausgabe, Gnade in Fülle. Und for each letter of the word Gnade, there stands something, but I can't remember what.
Okay. Yeah, that would be the next thing. Who can remember it and who knows it? And the next question would be, which church lives according to it? And this is what I often experience. That's what Drucker says. I know so many mission statements of churches that are not even worth the paper they are written on it, because it was developed in a lot of workshops, and maybe you even have a church assembly that votes on it. But if it's not ingrained in your culture, if it's not what you really be, nobody would live it. Many huge companies invest a lot of money to develop this kind of mission statements. And I mean, they're mostly good for the marketing department, so that they can publish it in the press and say, well, these are the values of our company, and we are so ecological and so people-oriented and fair trade-oriented. But mostly what I read is what is really lived in the culture of the company is something completely different, and that is what Drucker meant. And therefore, the idea of culture and the culture we really live is an important thing to realize. Defining culture is even more difficult than defining leadership. But you can say culture means an integrated system of learned behavior patterns that are characteristic of the member of any given society. And culture includes everything. It includes how you do things, how you see things, it includes your values, it includes status conceptions, beliefs and faith, and how you make things. So culture is a definition of the whole way a group lives and acts. And there is a really interesting survey of a guy called Gerd Hofstede. Maybe you have heard of him. He is a professor on the University of Maastricht in Netherlands for organizational anthropology and international management. And the focus of his research was how does a national culture influence a company culture. And he did a famous analysis in the 80s of IBM employees. IBM is a worldwide operating company, and he looked at the culture in IBM in different countries, and he found four universal traits how to describe culture, and that was interesting. We can go through all of them. You find it in your materials. Later on, in 2000, he developed one more, and he says in each culture you find a certain amount of individualism or collectivism, certain amount of power distance, certain amount of more masculinity or femininity, and uncertainty avoidance. For us in leadership, one of the important things is the idea of power distance. Power distance means to which extent less powerful people members, less powerful members of an organization, an institution like the family, accept or expect that power is distributed unequally. That means there are societies where it's quite normal, and you accept this, that there are people that have higher power and they have the say on what you do, what you don't do, and how you function. And there are societies where there is a very low power distance, where people say, well, no way that you tell me what I have to do. I mean, I know the things, I'm also well educated, how you dare telling me what I have to do. And depending on in which culture we live, certain leadership styles won't really function. And in another culture, the same leadership style functions very well. So on the theme of power distance, and he did it worldwide, you see in these dark green countries, there is a very large power distance. So it's very well accepted that people know there are people that have the say on it, and I'm still the one who obeys. This works in families, this works in companies, this works in the society. And the lighter the green is, the smaller is the power distance. And the less it functions that people say, you just have to do it, and so do it. When we come to Germany, I guess I've spotted it right here. You see, in Germany, for example, there is a very small power distance. So it's probably difficult if you want to lead just with authority and say, well, I'm the leader, I saw I say how the things work and you just have to do it. Try it. You won't be very successful. Interesting that even within Europe, if you look at France, our directly neighbors, there is already a larger power distance. And if you look in other parts of the world, then the power distance is even larger. I've heard of an American CEO of a company. He was transferred to lead a company of the same company, a factory in Central America. And he brought his American way of leadership. So low power distance, that means I communicate with my team. I ask them, well, how do you think should we do things? Give me your advice. I'm interested in your opinions. I mean, from a German perspective, well, a perfect leader. That's the way I would like leader to be. They ask me as a member of the team, they consult me, they take into regard what I think, how to solve a certain problem or a certain thing. In Central America, this guy failed because his employee says, well, this guy is incompetent. He does not know how to do things. He always asks us and asks us. He has no idea. And so it's important to know in which society I live in order regarding my leadership style. The other point is individualism and collectivism. You see, there's a very individualistic societies here. And the third point, okay. The third point was uncertainty avoidance. There are societies that can perfectly live with certain uncertainties. So with ambiguities, so where not everything is crystal clear and regulated. We Germans are not very good with uncertainty. We have a lot rather high uncertainty avoidance. Therefore, in Germany, you have regulations for everything and rules for everything. And it's important to keep the rules and to stay to the rules. There are other societies where it's not so important, where you look into the situation and say, well, yeah, there is a rule, but this is a special situation and you have to react especially and differently and according to the situation. So culture is an important part, and it's important to know in which culture I live in order to get the right style of leadership. But despite that, we looked at ourselves, we looked at a biblical view of man, and we looked at culture. But despite that, there are 4 universals I discovered what people expect from leaders. And this you find all over the world. The first thing is what people expect from leaders is meaning, goal, and purpose. The primary task of a leader is to help people define their reality. Successful leaders put into words the longings and deeply felt needs of others. They create communities with their words. Without a common purpose, any organization is in trouble because the opposite of purpose is aimlessness, and it cannot be an old goal that inspires, energizes, and electrifies people. It must make sense and be relevant. So it's the first thing people expect from you is kind of meaning, goal, and purpose. And I found in this quote interesting. Successful leaders put into words the longings and deeply felt needs of others. But in order to be able to do this, you have to be connected to these people. You can't express their felt needs and deeply longings if you don't know them. So for me, one most important part of leadership is get connected with the people you lead. In organizational development theories, there is a term of leadership pornography. That means leadership that is completely distanced from the people you lead. You do it just from the green table, we say in Germany. You do it without connection to the people you lead, and this doesn't work. Leadership is not just a mechanical act. If you have the right tools and the right knowledge, then it works. It has always to do with being connected with people. The second thing is trust. Term is it's the one and only quality you cannot acquire, you cannot learn, but you must earn it. Trust is applied to you, is given to you by the people you lead. And without that people trust you, leadership is not really possible. The next and the third one is optimism and enthusiasm. Good leaders, important leaders, believe that they can achieve their goals and that everything will go well. So leaders are always agents of optimism, agents of hope that convey, yeah, well, we will be able to succeed. A good leader loves what he does and loves to do it. So if you're unsure by yourself of what you are doing or what you should do, is a good thing to do. If you think, well, this won't work anyway, you probably won't have much success as a leader. You can't energize people to go with you, to work with you, if you yourself say, well, I'm not sure if this will work out. I'm not really excited about that. And the last thing are actions and results. You just can preach trust and optimism and great visions what to do. People want to see results and actions. There should be at least our small steps be going to action. Yeah. There is for me an interesting quote of a famous hockey player, Wayne Gretzky. I'm not too much into ice hockey, but there must be a really star in the ice hockey world. And he says, you missed 100% of your shots that you don't shoot. Means to say, there are situations where you get not 100% of security that the decision you make will be the right one. The way you go or you intend to go will work out well. But he says, but doing nothing because you are not sure means you miss everything. So just start and try. You will fail, but if you do nothing, you always fail. So these are the basic 4 things people expect from leaders. And now I would, at the end, come to a second value from the I-Core 10 values that is interrelated with leadership as I experience it, that is the term of participation. Because if you assert a style of leadership that takes into account that you are not the only one who knows everything, and that the other people around you are also motivated, bringing your team, the church forward, having good ideas, having good capabilities, want basically the same, the best for the church, the best for the youth group, the best for your team, then a leadership style that takes into account participation is probably the most acceptable and the best one. If we look at the postmodern or millennial mindset, for people, why they get involved in projects or in some leadership tasks, there is a strong benefit orientation. That means the people ask the following questions: are my friends in on this? Is it fun? Can I do my thing? Is it somehow cool? That means, does it have a social status? Or is it more embarrassing if I tell my friends I'm doing this or that? And does it make sense? Is it really important if I invest my time, my energy, my being in this kind of project? And these are important questions. They sound not very Christian, they sound not very humble, they sound not very self-sacrificial, but it's just the way I experience, at least in our European culture, where people are motivated to invest their time and their energy in project. So I guess we have to have answers on these questions if we want to have people getting engaged into church. And there is also a goal orientation. For people it's important, can I do the things I really want to do? And this is the last one that is probably the most challenging, is the period of commitment foreseeable? Probably all would agree that it's easier to find people getting involved in a project where the start and the end is already foreseeable. So it's easier to get people involved in being a leader in a summer camp or so, where they know, well, half year before that, I know there are some preparatory meetings and my engagement ends when the summer camp is over, than to say, well, would you be the youth group leaders for the next 4 years? We now have church elections. And I think we have to rethink as a church some ways we do the things, because it would be more and more difficult to get people engaged in an engagement where you can't foresee when it ends. So we leave that one. And therefore, I guess, taking all this in account, the basic strategy for leadership for me is empowerment. And empowerment means approaches for greater participation and involvement of employees, church members, in order to be able to carry out their task as independently and in their own responsibility to the greatest possible extent. Making persons strong to do things, carry out tasks in their own responsibility. And it's also more a focus on a strength-oriented approach, and it becomes more and more prevalent in instrument organizational development. We as a church normally tend to focus on our deficits. I mean, we focus on, you're still a sinner, there are so much things you have to improve, you have to grow, you are not good enough, you have to become better, and we focus very less on the strengths we have. There is an interesting quote somewhere, I don't have it here, from Ellen White, when it comes to our human beings, where she says, we shouldn't focus so much on our sins we still have, because this is kind of a way of Satan to put us down, to make us depressive. She says we should more focus on the salvation and what Christ has done for us. And this fits right into this idea. Focus on your strengths and not on your deficit, because the people realize to work on your deficit that costs so much energy to make little improvements. But if you work on your strengths, you get with the same energy much better results. There is an interesting small booklet there. I have it here in German. It's a small booklet. It's called, in Germany, Develop Your Strengths. And it focuses on the strengths. And there is also, if you buy the booklet, there is also access code to an online test where you can see what strengths you have in leadership, in your personality. And if you do it with your team, then you find out where we have certain strengths and where we can work together on our strengths. In Germany, at least in the social sciences and when you work with youth and children, the term participation is now very prominent. In youth work, it is almost required that you have levels of participations of the young people in your organization, and this is a generally accepted pyramid of a degree of participation. It started from non-participation and up to self-organization. I mean, that's more than participation. And it's also in your material, and it is interesting if you do it with your team members, with your youth group. Do it for yourself and check where you think on which scale of participation level your leadership style is, and let the guys in your group say and determine where they think your leadership style of participation is. I had it now in a department. They had a kind of a team supervision lately, and the departmental leader is someone who comes from Central America, and he told me after that the result of this team supervision, and they did this participation scale. And she said to me, well, Werner, I know where I come from. I'm from a culture with a high power distance. So as I started as a departmental leader here, I consciously said, well, you have to do it differently than you do it at home. And so I tried to be very participative. And I saw myself around here or here. Interestingly, the team members of the department, so they saw her here. And that was an interesting experience. And where the team members, from their perspective, would prefer to be was here or almost here. And they had a lot of things to discuss after this. So if you want to do it with your group, it's a simple thing and it gives you a lot of discussion. Maybe in 5 minutes we have, I would like to share how I tried in my time as a youth director in my conference to implement a system of participation. In Germany it was in the 90s where the government says in youth work, if you want to have subsidies from the government, the youth organization have to be a self-governed organization. Yeah, this was kind of a challenge for us. I mean, how is youth work done in the church? Basically, the youth leader is elected by the church in the election process. The youth department is in the church or in the conference is part of the church. The church says what budget there is. The church controls what is done with the budget, and so on. Now back there, then we had to develop bylaws for the youth organization in order to show that this is a kind of a self-controlled organization. And I mean, you know, if you develop bylaws, you can do it that they just fit the regulations the governments want to have, but you don't have to live by it. But from my perspective, I say if participation is a serious thing, and if it motivates people to invest their time, to invest their energy, if they have the keys, if they have the competencies to make decisions, then we tried to live it, and we did it. We tried to copy the church structure in the youth organization. So we had a constituency meeting every year. So the delegates of every youth group came in this constituency meeting. They decided the budget for the next year. They decided the strategic plans for the next year, and every 2 years they elected the officers of the youth organization of the conference. And on church level it had been the same. And we had 4 officers in the board of directors, you say, in the youth organization. We had a kind of a president, a vice president, and a treasurer, and there was one officer that was a representative of the adult organization. That means, so on the conference level, I as youth director was a set officer in this board of directors, and 3 of them have been elected by the constituency, by the delegates of the youth groups. So I have been part of the leadership team, but I was one of 4. And I said then, well, if this is the situation, then I give my complete conference budget to the youth organization I had. So the budget for the youth. So I said, that's your money. Do whatever you want, but you have the obligation to do the youth work in the conference. So they decided what kind of summer camps they made. They decided what kind of group leadership education they do. They decided the whole program. I was one of the 4, but I was just one of the 4. It needed a little bit work of convincing the conference committee to buy into it, but finally they did. And well, at least from my perspective, it really worked. I mean, when I looked as a youth director on my budget, I always was the year end over my budget. So I always spent more than it was budgeted. But since I have been also the treasurer of the conference, it wasn't a problem. I had a hard talk with myself, and then we find a nice agreement why it was okay to go over the budget. But as soon as the youth organization, as mostly lay members started, they kept within the budget. They even said, well, we have 2 goals for the next 2 years. We want to have enough money to buy 2 small buses for our work. And we also want to have finally a whole year's budget in our reserve funds, because you never know when the conference decides we don't have enough money for the youth work. We just reduce the budget so we can do all our projects at least the next year. And within 4 years, they reached all these goals. They was able to buy 2 buses for the work. They had a completely budget of 1 year in the reserve funds. And they did it by making hard decisions, I would say. They decided that all the youth camps and the Pathfinder camps had to be self-sufficient, so there will be no subsidies. They had to finance themselves. They also decided we had a large group training for our group leaders in the churches, and we paid travel expenses for them if they participated in this group training once a year. But they realized in the Pathfinder part, they realized that this travel expensive for this large leadership training, it's almost 25% of our yearly budget. That's too much. So they decided we just pay travel expenses if the people have more than 100 kilometers to drive. Everything that is closer to the thing beyond 100 kilometers has to pay for itself. Has been done in the constituency meeting, it has been voted. I just imagined if I, as youth director back there, would have made this decision. They probably would have torn me apart. They would have told me that's typically of the church. They tried to to reduce the budget for the volunteers and for youth work and so on and on. But since they decided it, it was well accepted and it helped them to reach the goal. Make a long story short, they did all the summer camps and organized it. Had been organized by volunteers. Well, my office, of course, supported them, and I, as a youth director, supported them, but the basic thing was done by them. And they told me, Werner, organizing such things, we know it very well. We can do it. It's no problem. Where we need our pastors, it's for the sermons, for the preaching, for the counseling of the people, and that was the way it went. So organized the whole things were by lay members, and the pastors had a really nice time because they could concentrate on their preaching. They had enough time to counsel members, just to be with them, to talk with them, to spend time with them. For some of my colleagues it was a little bit hard because they were not the leaders of the summer camp. So there was a lay leader, and he told them time by time, well, I expect that you are in time, that you spend more time with the guys, not just sitting around and drinking coffee. But it worked out well, and by and large, most of my pastors also said, well, that's really good. I really can do what I'm supposed to do and not are too much into organization. Yeah, that was experiment. I always realized if you trust people and if you invest in people and hand them over the keys, give them competences, that brings a lot of energy and a lot of involvement. Because as I said, in a postmodern society, the people will be able or want to be able to decide things, to do their things, to handle things the way they want to handle it, and probably I always normally expected they do it very good because they are as much interested in bringing the church forward as we as the professional leaders are. And therefore participation and empowerment is for me one of the key figures to good leadership, at least in our culture and in our time. And the results of empowerment and good leadership are the following, and these are commonly agreed upon. In good leadership and in empowerment, people experience themselves as important. And you experience yourself as important if you are asked, if you realize that what you bring in and the idea you bring in are recognized. Good leadership results in that learning and competence is very important. So we put a lot of effort into the training of our volunteers and of our local leaders. And some of them told me if they finished their university thing, if they started their professional career, and if they had been then in some kind of positions where they had so intercompany trainings like presenting things, leading small groups or so, they told me, well, Werner, we had all this already in our church leadership trainings. So learning and competence is important. People are part of a community, that's also necessary, that to be part, they know I belong here and I'm well respected, I'm part of a community. And the last one, work is fun. And I think this is also an important thing. There had to be a fun factor in the whole thing. You can't just expect that people are being engaged for a long time if it's just suffering and hardship. And I think as a leader I always look that work is always part of fun. If we did youth retreats, it has always to be a fun factor for the people who work very hard. At least at the end of them, we met in a restaurant and we celebrated if it was a good youth camp, if it was a good leadership training. So it has to be a little bit fun in the whole thing. Norman Lear, an American author and filmmaker, says, the goal is not worth attaining until you enjoy the journey. But that's not always possible. There are sometimes goals, to attain them, it's not an enjoyable journey. But by and large, I think, working for the church, you should be able to enjoy the journey and not just focus on the goal and say, well, I will have to attain it and I must go through it. And as far as I look back in my experience as a leader in the church, I could say, well, most of the time I enjoyed the journey. And that helped me to keep motivated and to motivate people to buy into it. And I just would like to end with a quote of Warren Bennis again. He says, so to you who aspire to lead people, I again say, be humble. Stop trying to herd cats and start building trust and mutual respect. Your cats will respond. They will sense your purpose, keep your business purring, and even kill your rats. And that's my advice to you. If you lead people, start building trust, mutual respect. Try to get them involved. Try to hand them over the keys as much as possible. Give them room to decide what they want to do. Give them room to get involved. Give them competencies they need. Hand them over as much of the keys as you think it's possible. And I think you will experience that people are get very involved, that people invest a lot of energy and a lot of their time in it. If they realize that I can make a difference, that I can do the things I want, that I can make changes that are important for me and for the church. So thank you for your attention. It was probably not easy to keep awake during that time of the day. I mean, are there any questions from your side, or comments, or remarks? Well, then I say thank you for your attention.
Thank you.
And yeah, enjoy the rest of the day.